Good evening and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is March 31st, 2016, and a lot has happened since I've done a show. It's been a couple of weeks. We've had the terrorist attack in Belgium, and Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders are both breaking records, making a lot of waves in the normal course of the presidential election season, breaking new ground left and right, literally on both sides of the aisle. Bernie Sanders is almost tied with Hillary Clinton now, and Trump is still the front runner. He continues to make gaffes. He got caught in a trap, a gotcha journalism moment by Chris Matthews from MSNBC the other night, got himself locked into a position in which he had to say that women who got abortions illegally should be punished in some way. And that was because he was maneuvered into that, saying that, and a lot of people don't think that he really believes that he's not even really pro-life. He claims to be pro-life, but it's pretty clear that Donald Trump is the most liberal of all the Republican candidates, and he is apparently susceptible to being maneuvered into these corners by clever journalists, and this is what's happened in this case. And he backtracked very quickly, but by that time the damage had been done, and whether this is going to hurt his chances to be the front runner on the Republican side, hard to say. But the Belgium thing, this is very suspicious. Again, very strange, not looking like a genuine terrorist attack to me. From what I've seen, the videos that were taken seconds after the bombs went off in the airport, and also surveillance video of the bomb actually going off in the airport, looks like another flash, a lot of bright flash, smoke, loud noise, but the damage, nothing like close to, not even close to what they're saying the damage was. The death toll, very high death toll, 38 or something dead now, 150 wounded. No way. From looking at the videotape from the cell phone, only one that I've seen, one angle, one cell phone person, a real explosion is like, for instance, one took place, I think, in Madrid. I think it was in 2004 or something like that, where you see the bomb explosions coming out of a crowded railroad station, out of these railroad cars. You talk about horror. It's hard to watch it because the shrieking is just unbelievable. The terror, the sound of the shrieking of the crowded railway station, the people running for their lives, so much more realistic than this Hollywood production that we're looking at Belgium. People say, oh, how could that be? How could that be? It can be. It can be. They can get away with so much. It's amazing. Watch Wag the Dog sometime, the movie with Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman. Okay, so we're going to watch a clip that's 24 minutes long, and it's actually really interesting. It's about bail-ins. It's an interview with Ellen Brown, who's an economist, has written many books, has written another book recently, and she is really amazing in her knowledge, her understanding of how this works, and what could be coming to people, Americans, who have money in banks. We thought we owned our money once we put it in a bank. Think again, friends. Think again. And she lays it all out. As she explains, what's happening in Europe could happen and very likely will happen at some point in the United States. It's the opposite of a bankruptcy, where instead of a bank going bankrupt, the bank and then falling apart or dissolving, it takes all the people's money, all the creditors, and uses that money to save the bank. So in other words, it bankrupts everyone else, or destroys everyone else, or almost destroys everyone else. And your money is apparently not insured by the FDIC. I mean, they say it's insured, but the average investor will be the last person to get his money out of the bank after an event like we saw in 2008, where a lot of banks collapsed. Too big to fail, my friends. So let's watch this. It's about 24 minutes long, and then I'll get back.
I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us once again, Ellen Brown. Ellen Brown is of the popular website ellenbrown.com, also known as Web of Debt blog. Ellen Brown, thank you for joining us today from California.
Thanks, Greg. Great to talk to you.
I just want to extend your introduction. You're an expert on public banking. You are an attorney. You've written a dozen books. You've got another book coming up. We'll talk about that at the end of the interview. But you wrote a stunningly frightening article. And the reason why it's so stunningly frightening, as an attorney and as a good writer that you are, that you sourced everything and it's real, which is what's so frightening. It's like, oh, that they can do that, and it's about bail-ins, that you were on this website, USA Watchdog, about this time, talking about the G20, setting this all up for the world, that they can not, use taxpayer bailouts. They can use the money in the banks. Can you tell me why that you think that life savings, as your words, life savings could be wiped out in a derivatives collapse?
Well, the bail-ins have started in Europe, but we in the U.S. are actually more vulnerable because under the Dodd-Frank Act and the Bankruptcy Reform Act of 2005, derivative claimants go first in a bankruptcy. So they're actually exempted from the bankruptcy rules, which require a stay, an automatic stay, where you can't. So the derivatives claimants can go in and just grab the collateral. And because we have a huge derivatives exposure here of 247 trillion the last time I looked for 5 U.S. banks, they could take all the collateral and there could be nothing left. I mean, theoretically, your deposits are covered by FDIC insurance, which insures up to $250,000. But the FDIC stands in line behind the derivatives, and so do the state and local governments, who consider their deposits secured, just like the derivatives are. But the derivatives people get to take their money first. Those are the insiders. They're the banks betting against each other primarily.
And this is what it means. In your article, you talked about derivatives have superiority over security. Superiority over securities. Does this affect pensions as well?
They have super priority over everything. So it's your deposits. They're the creditors. All the creditors are covered in a bail-in. All the creditors' money will be taken in a bail-in. So a bail-in is like the opposite of a bankruptcy, where in a bankruptcy, the bank is liquidated in order to pay off the creditors. In a bail-in, the creditor's money is taken in order to keep the bank alive. So we get to die while the bank lives instead of the reverse. So they specifically say creditors, which obviously means shareholders and bondholders. But what most people don't realize is that depositors are also considered creditors. When you put your money in the bank, it becomes the property of the bank, and all you have is an IOU. So the bank can do what it will with your money, and they're allowed to gamble in derivatives. This is since Glass-Steagall was repealed in 1999. So now that whole pool of fund is commingled, and they can do with it as they will. Like, there was an exemption for like 5% of their derivatives, which were clearly gambling, right up till a year ago, December, when Citigroup slipped into the Cromnibus budget bill, a rider that eliminated even that 5%. So now all their derivatives can be done in the depository arm of banks, which means they're gambling with our money and they can lose our money, and that the FDIC covers it. In other words, that is supposedly insured money.
Well, that's insured, but I mean, the FDIC has what, $50 billion?
Right, $67 billion. The last time I looked, they have a credit line of $500 billion with the Treasury, but that's just a credit line. First of all, I mean, it's a debt, and who's going to pay it back? It would have to be paid back by the banks who pay the premiums for the FDIC. And when they went over budget by $8 billion in 2009, I think it was, it nearly broke the little banks. So if they can't afford the premiums on an $8 billion deficit in the FDIC fund, what would a $500 billion deficit look like? And even that's not going to be enough for a $10 trillion derivatives bust, which is what Elizabeth Warren and another politician, they had a study done to determine what their liability was, the taxpayers' liability was, just from that rider of last December in the Cromnibus spending bill, and they said it was a $10 trillion derivative liability just for that 5%. And that includes the oil derivatives, which, if you ask me, are like real throat clutchers.
Well, the oil derivatives are all the leverage on top of the oil debt, and of course we know that oil prices. Everybody's like, "Woohoo!" I'm paying less than $2 a gallon in most places, in many places, for gasoline. But there's a big downside, and that is that people aren't going to get. There's not enough profit there for the bonds to be paid. Correct?
Yeah, and then the question is, why did oil plunge like it did? It looks like political warfare. Well, I have a theory on that. We could go into it if you want.
Yes.
I read this, and it looks pretty credible to me. You know, John Kerry met with King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia in August of 2014. And before that, in June, I think, oil was at one of its all-time highs. It was something like $116 a barrel for Brent crude. And then last month, it was down to $38 a barrel. So it totally plunged after John Kerry met with King Abdullah. And some people, it was rumored that the goal of this, that they agreed that Saudi Arabia would flood the market with oil and bring the price down, and the purpose would be to get Russia and get Iran, which didn't necessarily work. But you could envision that Kerry may have said something like, well, don't worry, you'll take losses, but we'll cover your losses. But of course we can't just pay you directly, because that would be too obvious. So what we'll do is you buy derivatives protecting your oil profits, and we'll be the counterparty, because nobody will know who the counterparty is, because this is all over-the-counter hidden stuff. So we, the State Department, U.S. State Department, or whoever, the military or somebody, will be the counterparty. So we'll be flooding the money to you to pay off your derivative. And according to Catherine Austin Fitts, there's $40 trillion, I think, in the, or maybe it's $60 trillion. There's a lot of money in the black budget. So they've got the money to do it. So it all looks highly suspicious. But it was Citigroup that was pouring on the derivatives, the oil derivatives, when everybody else was pulling back on their derivatives, the other big derivatives banks. And it was Citigroup that pushed to get that last 5% waived, so that it too could be covered by taxpayer money.
Well, and depositor money.
Yeah.
And do you think people realize? Because somebody sent me this, they sent it to me, and I went ahead and looked it up online independently myself. And this is from a big bank. This is a commercial banking agreement. It's from BB&T, and in here it basically lays out that they have no fiduciary responsibility to you, and you basically are a creditor. And I can't imagine that's the only bank that's done that. I mean, they've changed the rules. Deposit, that's not your money. You give it to them. You are loaning them the money. You are a creditor, and people aren't grasping that. Is that
right?
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right. And now they have all this push for going all cash, for eliminating cash. so that you really don't even have the option of pulling your money out of the bank. Money is something that exists digitally in a bank today, pretty much.
And people say, well, I don't have more than $250,000. I'm insured. And I'm thinking, well, you're insured, but what will your money be worth if they have to monetize, just the insured deposits, 500 trillion, 10 trillion, whatever. I mean, there's payrolls there. There's all kinds of money that's short term in, multitude of banks. It's not just, deposits.
It's over $6 trillion is covered by the FDIC in deposits, but it's way more than they've got in the fund. They've got $67 billion in the fund, so that's like 1%.
What would your money be worth if they had to just print that money to say, oh, you had $100,000 or $150,000 or whatever? Oh yeah, okay, you're insured, and they just print the digits and put it in there. What would the money be worth? I mean, wouldn't that be the classic example of hyperinflation? Weimar Germany, here we come.
Well, personally, I think that is the answer. I think we should all have an account at the central bank. Once you put your money in, it's your money. When you want to pull it out, the numbers are there because it's the central bank, which has the power to create the digits. But it's really not necessary. When you borrow money, it's really not necessary that you have savers that put the money in there first. Well, that's a whole different topic. But it seems to me that we do have to redesign the entire banking system. And the ideal system was that American colonists in Pennsylvania in Benjamin Franklin's time. I think we need to go back to that again, where the bank is a public utility. The government creates the currency in the form of payments for goods and services. I mean, it's all connected to goods and services. If there's no goods and services, there's no money. That's how money comes into the system. And the government is the lender. So they have the power to control, once your money's in there, it's there. There's no way that somebody else can top it.
Well, speaking of goods and services, I mean, here's, you think, well, how could this, they're telling us the economy's great. And I just pulled this off Zero Hedge in a lovely little story that Deutsche Bank is freaking out about the perfect storm. And here we have the Baltic Dry Index. I'm going to go full screen on this. And then here we have, this is back in the 90s. Let's make sure I have that. Yeah, this is back in the 90s back here. Okay, and then here it is today, which is tanking. It's historic lows. The Baltic Dry. That means the goods and services aren't moving. That means people aren't getting paid. Isn't that a way to accelerate these derivative losses that you're talking about that could happen? That could basically wipe out people's savings.
Yeah, and the derivatives only go for a certain amount of time, and because it's all dark and it's all shadow banking. We don't know when these things might expire, and then suddenly those companies could go bankrupt.
And you're thinking that is this part of the scenario that you're seeing, that this could be sooner than later? That you're talking about people being wiped out, and 2016, you're giving that as a date that savings could be wiped out. And here we are again. And if you look at this chart, here we are. This is the 90s again on the right side, right over here. This is the 90s over here. And here we are again, bouncing along this line. This was the 2008, little crash, and this looks really similar to, things are going down, and we are the manufacturing is shrinking, is stopping.
Yeah. Well, the reason I said 2016 was that in the EU, they are actually taking deposits as of January 2016. The reason this made the news was that in November of last year, a pensioner committed suicide after he lost 100,000 euros, his whole life savings, in his bank, where he banked there for 50 years. But he had bought bonds, bank bonds. It wasn't deposit. But he wrote a suicide note. He hanged himself and wrote a suicide note blaming the bank. But he really should blame this whole system that has been adopted by the Financial Stability Board and the EU Banking Union, where they first have to bail in the creditors' money before they can touch their bailout fund, which is contributed. It's premiums from the various banks in the country. so in January, the reason that the Prime Minister bailed in these 4 insolvent banks then, before January, was that had he waited till January, many more people he said millions of people would have been, millions of savers would have lost their money. So that's what we have to look forward to, because the European banks many of them are very shaky. They rushed through that banking union knowing that those banks were shaky, and they wouldn't do stress tests until after they had the union in place, because they didn't want people to know how shaky these banks were. But it was supposed to be a 3-pronged deal, which would be bailouts, bail-ins, and deposit insurance. But they never got around to the deposit insurance, so they don't have Eurozone-wide deposit insurance. All they have is you have to bail in your creditors' money, which would include the depositors' money now as of January. Of course, supposedly over 100,000 euros, but again, you've got the problem of you don't have a Euro-wide or Eurozone-wide bail-in fund to pay that money. So all you've got for your insured deposits are what the premiums of the banks in the country, the pool of those put together by those banks. So if the pool doesn't have enough money, then you're out of luck. And if, like, it was up to our FDIC, we would be out of luck. They definitely don't have enough money to cover a big bust.
And you think this happens in 2016? You think the bail-in scenario for U.S. banks happens this year?
Well, it happens in Europe this year, because they've said so. I mean, they've put it right in there that this is in January of 2016, they're going to start capping up the deposits. And over 100,000 euros is not that much. I mean, businesses keep that much cash around because they need to pay their workers. They've got payroll to meet. They've got suppliers to meet. So that's what happened in Cyprus, that it was largely the local businesses that got hit. They lost 50% of their money. And so they had to lay off people or close their doors, and the whole economy just plummeted after that. So it's very hard on the economy.
And you're talking about this being on not just a European level, but it could float right on over here across the Atlantic here to the United States, and these bail-ins are going to hit here eventually as well. And business is going to just get creamed. I mean, your payroll, sorry, it's been bailed into the bank. The bank has it now.
Yeah. Well, we don't have a trigger like a provision that says January 2016, but we have the bail-in scheme built into the Dodd-Frank Act of 2010, and then there was the Financial Stability Board formalized this, the G20 formalized it in Brisbane, Australia in November of 2014, and we have the Bankruptcy Reform Act of 2005 that says that derivatives go first. So our potential liability is much greater than even the European depositors.
Do you think it gets bad enough to where the whole system will absolutely shut down? Do you think the whole system will shut down over this? I mean, this article is written in very factual. You lay it out, the Dodd-Frank, all the pieces of legislation that point to exactly what they're going to do. Do you think it could shut down the whole system?
It sure looks that way. I mean, I would like Paul Craig Roberts says, you always think it's all set to collapse, and they seem to manage to do something to prop it up. They can change the rules, or they can tap into their black budget. But nobody anticipated what happened in 2008, and that was a $700 billion bailout. Even if the FDIC tapped up its treasury line, that's only $500 billion. So things certainly could go wrong. And why are they rushing to put all these provisions into place? They're expecting something.
You think they're expecting something because they've got everything? Is everything set now? They can do the bail-ins. Everything's all set now, right?
Yeah, they think they have avoided too big to fail, but what they've actually done is formalized too big to fail. I mean, it's the end of capitalism. There's no such thing as too big to fail in a capitalist society, where you say that certain corporations can't fail and that you have to take the people's money in order to prop them up. That is no longer capitalism.
And you're a capitalist. You think that your money is your money, and you believe in property rights. Obviously, if it's your money, you believe in property rights. You're a capitalist.
Well, I do think there's a I mean, I'm head of the Public Banking Institute, and what we want to do is publicly owned banks. So in every country, on average, something like 50% of the economy is publicly owned and 50% is privately owned. It's just a question of which 50%. For us, the big 50% is like the military. The military is our biggest socialist engine. It seems to me we'd be better off with publicly owned banks, which is just acknowledging that money is a public utility. It's our money. We, the people, back it. Clearly we back it. We're now making these banks too big to fail. We are backing these banks. They are sucking the profits out like a parasite from the economy. If we are going to be supporting them, the profits should go back to the people. It should be, the credit should be put into these manufacturing jobs that you're pointing out are being lost. Manufacturing is disappearing because the banks make more money on derivatives than by making loans to small and medium-sized businesses, which is where manufacturing comes from and where jobs come from.
Ellen Brown, before we close, I want to talk about your next book, book number 13. You have another book coming out. What's the working title, and when do you think it'll be out? What's it about?
It's called Infrastructure Without Debt. So it's basically about using quantitative easing for infrastructure. I mean, if we have this amazing tool of the ability to create credit, we should be using it for things we desperately need. Here we have this belief that we're in austerity mode, that there's not enough money around, but the Fed is the creator of money. So if you were issuing money for constructive purposes, like happened in the 1930s through the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, where you're actually funding businesses to pay the money back. So in the 1930s, there was all this credit that was funneled into roads and bridges and dams and, electricity and farms and things that paid the loans back. Over the course of 20 years, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation actually made a profit for the government. It was a government-owned financial institution because they couldn't get the Fed to do it. So they set up this other institution which was funneling credit, largely borrowed from the Treasury, so largely just created on the book, funneled to businesses, which then paid it back. It turned a profit for the government when it was finally shut down, and rebuilt the entire country. We could do that too. That's what the Chinese are doing. They just issue the credit. They build those amazing trains and all this infrastructure they're building. They're just issuing the credit, building the thing, and then the proceeds from the thing they build pay back the loan and balance the books. So that's what I'm writing about. So we've got to get the credit out there first, and we have the tools. We can get credit out there. We're sort of blindly thinking that the government is broke and that they can't do all these things that we, the people, expect government to do.
Well, it's bail out the banks at all costs. Even if we kill every business and kill every bank account and kill all the credit, as long as we have the banks, it's okay. Lloyd Blankfein is a billionaire. He should have been a greeter at Walmart. I'm sorry. That denigrates greeters at Walmart. But he should have been a Skid Row bum, Lloyd Blankfein. He turned into a billionaire, and this is outrageous.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing, the system that we have. But the good thing is that people are becoming more and more aware of it, and I think that's the first thing that has to happen is we have to understand what's going on, and then we have to consolidate into a movement so that we actually have some power. The 99% obviously outnumbers the 1%, but we need to know what's going on and what would work. Right now, that even in the money reform movement, people are still arguing about what the solution is. I mean, I have mine, and then other people say, no, we have to do it this way, and so we have to iron all that out first. But we're at that very exciting place, I think, in history where we're actually designing new systems and thinking of what new possibilities there are.
Well, if you believe in capitalism, you believe in bankruptcy, and we've lost sight of believing in bankruptcy. And what's the working title? When do you think it'll be out, your book?
Infrastructure Without Debt. I'm so busy. I'm going to Europe in February. I'll be speaking in Iceland and Manchester, England, and Wales on public banking. And then I have some other things set up after that. So writing books is just not as fast as it used to be, but hopefully in the spring.
Okay, Ellen Brown, ellenbrown.com, also her popular moniker, Web of Debt blog. Ellen Brown, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks, Greg. Always great to talk to you.
All right, we're back. That was a fascinating 24-minute clip of the interview with Ellen Brown, and you can see that she really knows her stuff, and it's amazing. I think I'm going to watch this again, because what we are learning is that when you put your money in the bank, you are not necessarily going to be able to get it out. The other issue, of course, is that there could be, rather than you getting interest on the money that you get, that you put in the bank as a little reward, the way it used to be, now it could be that when you put money in the bank, you will have to pay for the privilege of putting money in the bank. So they will be deducting money, presumably, from your bank account every month as a payment. And this is just incredible. It's just unheard of. And as Ellen Brown said, the trend is to get rid of cash completely, and so that people won't even have cash. And how would you be able to take your money out of your bank if there was no cash to take the money out and put it under your mattress or whatever? So this would be, I guess the only thing you could do would be to use your credit card to buy gold or something, or some other something else that an asset that would have a value that would be not it would go up and down with the market like gold does. Gold is a volatile aspect, and silver and palladium and platinum, and they do go up and down, but they never go to zero. That will never happen. They have an intrinsic value that has always been there. And why is that? You might say, well, because the difference between gold and silver, platinum, palladium is that these have value in many, many different areas, besides just as a storehouse of wealth, just a bar of gold to sit there and look pretty. I mean, they're good for making jewelry, which enhances the value, and these metals do not rust, they do not tarnish. I mean, they tarnish, maybe silver tarnishes, gold tarnishes, but they don't degrade like steel does, for instance, in water, and turn into nothing. That's part of the intrinsic value, is the durability. The fact that these metals have so many industrial uses. They're really good conductors of electricity. And I mean, even copper actually has intrinsic value. Aluminum has intrinsic value, can be reused and reused, and aluminum does corrode. Maybe copper does corrode a little bit, but these are what they mean. This is what it means when we say intrinsic value. They're useful. Whereas a dollar bill, the only intrinsic value that a dollar bill has as a piece of paper is just that it would provide you a certain number of units, of BTU units of heat energy if you were to burn that dollar bill. And if it was a $100 bill or a $1 bill, it would have the same value as a source of heat. And we remember in the Weimar Republic in the 1920s in Germany, in which literally bills, marks, paper marks, had lost all their value, and the only value that they had left was to be used to heat your home. Basically, you throw it in the fireplace or throw it in the wood stove, the coal stove, and it burns up, and you get that heat energy out of that dollar bill. And God forbid that should ever happen. But digital money has even less value than paper money because it doesn't even have the value of being able to burn it in a stove for heat. And I suppose with a paper dollar you could plaster them on your wall and make a pretty design on your wall, something like that. But this is something that we have to consider. This is the real world. This is how money actually works, and what money is, and what money represents, and what it doesn't represent. Is this what's coming? I don't know, and I certainly hope not. Now, it is true that most Americans, I guess around 50% of Americans, have no savings at all. They're essentially living paycheck to paycheck. And they would say, well, it's not going to affect me because if the banks have a bail-in. Well, unfortunately it will affect you, because even if you don't have money savings that are lost in some kind of catastrophic event, like we're talking about here, then nevertheless, the people who do have money savings in the banks and lose that money, they very well may lose their business because they won't be able to pay their bills. And they may have employees, and that employee may be you. And therefore you will be affected by what is potentially a catastrophic bail-in situation with the banks. The good news is that these eventualities that we're facing are avoidable. They do not have to be this way. I mean, people know, some economists understand that there is a way out of this situation, but they're just not willing to take that, because essentially the captains of industry, the people in charge of Wall Street, the leadership, the elites, they have their own agenda. They are looking out for themselves. They are using this system, which is a very corrupt and inefficient system, to enrich themselves. And it's the boom and bust cycle. And since they control the boom and bust cycle, then they can make a profit during the boom cycle and in the bust cycle, because that's when they can pull their investments out of those corporate entities that will fail. And before it fails, they'll know when it's going to fail. They pull it out first. They contribute to the fail by pulling it out. And then once it collapses, then they can, and it's prostrate, then they can feed on the goodies, the guts, the valuable parts of that prostrate corporation which has failed, and in order to enrich themselves. And so this is the model that we're looking at here. And this is not capitalism, just in case you're wondering about this. Oh yeah, this is the capitalist model. No, this is not capitalism at all. This is pure criminality. This is not the way capitalism is supposed to work. It's more like fascism. It's where business and leadership get together, or as Mussolini called it, corporatism. They get together, they collude in secret, and they don't tell everybody else to run the show that in a way that is most conducive to their own profit. And they would deliberately use these underhanded means in order to undermine and destroy their competition. The way capitalism is supposed to run is using competition. Competition is essential for capitalism to operate as a healthy and workable system. And this is the opposite of communism or socialism. I mean, because communism, once it's in place, is supposed to distribute the wealth evenly across the board. It owns the means of production, and therefore is in the position, ideally, to basically run the country in the way that it would be a utopian ideal society. But in reality, it does not work, and it never has worked. It cannot work because human beings need that competition. They need to get a reward for hard work. See, hard work is essential, and the reward for hard work is essential. So in a communist situation, no matter how hard you work, you're not going to be rewarded because everyone is rewarded approximately equally. So what this does is, and this is a very simple way of looking at it, but it really seems to work this way. What happens is that the people who normally work really hard don't work as hard because they're not going to get rewarded for it. There's no stimulation there. There's nothing for them that will give them the impetus and the energy to innovate, to work harder, to come up with new solutions. And so they become essentially another worker drone. And this is what it encourages. Just a worker drone who just sort of puts in his time and gets his paycheck and goes home. And he sees the other worker who's just even doing less than he is, and he's not getting punished, he's not losing his job, he's not getting fired, or he's looking at the incompetent guy. He knows he's competent, or she knows she's competent, very competent, but she's not getting noticed. She's not getting lifted up through her merit to the next level necessarily. No, what you're seeing is that those who were most loyal to the system and who brown nose and grovel to those bureaucrats and leaders who run the system in the communist system, they are the ones who are given rewards. Not because they're most competent, but because they're the most loyal. They can be trusted. They grovel. They know what to say. They're the most ruthless. They can do without guilt what is needed to be done in the system in order to keep the system running smoothly, ostensibly for everyone, but in reality, especially for those who have the most to lose. If the system fails, that would be the elites, because they gradually accrue to themselves more and more of the goodies that are available that are those rewards. They're getting their rewards. So in other words, the leadership is not operating on the same level. They're not operating on the same level of communism in which all rewards are more or less even for everyone. And so the leadership is only pretending to be communist, and they're really acting more like a fascist state. And I mean, a fascist state is really not that different than a communist state, because the fascist state also promises the big reward, or the the fair shake to the worker, the average worker. You know, you'll get your fair share for what you do. You know, we will make sure of that. We have the power now, since we're in control, to do that. But the problem is that you have the malcontents. The malcontents in a free society can mouth off as much as they want. They can try something different. They'll say, we're not, you know, as within the limitations of the law, but they can say, we don't like the capitalist system. We just don't like it. We're going to try a form of pure communism over here. And this has happened many times in the United States. There have been utopian societies that have actually worked on a very small level for a while, where you have people living communally, and everybody gets the same, and it's very equal, and it's just smooth. The rewards are sort of evenly distributed among everyone. And this, maybe for a very short period of time, people could decide, okay, we're going to accept this as an experiment, and we'll be able to learn something from this, hopefully. And maybe they have a spiritual or religious master, a teacher, who gives them something very pure and high and refined to think about or to meditate upon, rather than trying to get ahead in the world and get wealthy and get all this stuff, and I want this, I want that. So they're not that concerned about getting a bunch of stuff like the typical capitalist person. In that kind of a situation where you have a religious or spiritual foundation or core to your little society, that can work. But if you don't have that, they've done studies on these, you're less likely to work very long, because the same old desires are still operating. So you need to redirect those desires from materialism to some sort of a beautiful, ethereal enlightenment or something like that. And that could make it work better. So some of those utopian societies are still sort of work. Sometimes they go bad too, They sometimes do. They go, like the Hare Krishna people, was a very sort of strange sect in America. I think they're almost gone now. There might be a few left. But boy, they got some real problems, with some deaths involved even. They got in really, really crazy. And basically what it was a form of Hinduism, but among Americans. And they would dress up in the saffron robes, and everybody makes fun of in old comedies you'd often see the Hare Krishna people singing and clapping their hands in airports with their saffron robes on or whatever. They'd be Americans with their heads shaved and so on. So this is one of those situations here in America where people like to make fun of capitalism, but have we ever actually really seen capitalism operating in the correct form, in that pure form, in which the safeguards are in place so that the big guys cannot run over everybody else unfairly and in a criminal manner? Because you need that competition. Without competition, without different people competing to make the quality product, the best quality product, they compete with each other, and then ideally the people buy the product or not, depending on how good of a product it is. And it encourages innovation, because you do get a reward for a good product. And just like if you make any kind of a baked good, or like a loaf of bread or something, people are going to go for the best tasting bread with the best ingredients, the crispiest crust, the best flavor, and all the yummy stuff that goes with a good quality baked goods. And they will do well, and that is the way it should be. But if the guy that had the crummy loaf of bread that really wasn't that good, and he was able to collude with the leadership of that town or that city or that county or that state or that country in order to find a way to unfairly target his competitor. And he would say that, he would find something. He would say that maybe the really good bread has a certain ingredient in it, and they would say, well, you can't use that ingredient. Anyway, I mean, you understand, they collude with leadership to make a law to put the competitor out of business. This is one thing we see in something like chicken growers. Okay, you have enormous chicken factories. I call them concentration camps for chickens. And they're horrific. They're horrific mills for just completely inhumane horror show. You know, these chickens don't get out of their cage, this little tiny cage, their whole life. They're incredibly mistreated, no empathy for the lives of these chickens by the ownership at all. But they put out a lot of chicken. Now, it may not taste very good. It may taste like garbage a little bit, or maybe maybe it's just sort of old tasting and smells kind of awful, you know, but it's really cheap, and you can put all the spices on it and bread it, and then it all greasy, you know, and deep fried in grease, and then it's okay. You know, it's reasonably okay. And it's full of course, all kinds of toxins, you know, and horrible. The food that they feed these chickens is horrible. You know, it's just, they're forced to eat it because they'll starve if they don't. And they're not allowed to pick and choose what they want to eat. And then you have a small grower who has free-range chickens, and genuinely free-range, not fake free-range, but actual free-range, where they're happy and they're running around, and they get to eat a lot of bugs and things that make for a high-quality, good-tasting, healthy food, right? So what does the big grower do? He says, wow, they're cutting into my business. They've got a really good product. Well, I'm going to take care of that. I'm going to go to leadership, who I'm friends with, and they're investors in my company, and I'm going to give them, that leadership guy, money for his campaign to help him become reelected. And so he's going to do something for me. And then, we're going to make a law. He says, well, I got a problem. This free-range guy he's cutting into my profits. So they say, okay, we'll put a license. We'll say, well, we can't have these chickens running around here without a license. They're running around free. We need to put a license on every single one of these chickens. Well, then you have to buy, and the grower has to buy a license for every chicken? Well, he says, well, what if they got loose and, some other chickens got mixed in that weren't licensed with the other chickens or something like that. Or if you got loose, we wouldn't know whose chicken it was. And we just need a license. We just want to keep track of your chickens for tax purposes or whatever. Make sure you're paying your taxes on all your chickens and so it just turns out that the price of the license is at more than the chicken is even worth. The chicken is worth $20 or $10, and the license is $12 or something like that. And they say, well, and so the free range grower says, well, what about this guy? Look at all these chickens he has. He has thousands of chickens. And they say, well, with him, because the chickens are in a barn and they never leave the barn and they're always in cages their whole life, and he knows exactly how many chickens, we'll just use only one license for all those chickens for each building. So instead of having 10,000 licenses, he only needs 5. Whereas you have 200 chickens and you need to get 200 licenses. So you see how unfair that is. And you could say, well, it just makes sense that he would do that. It would put the big guy out of business completely. And we can't have that because look at all the food he produces. And he's helping to feed the country. And we're sending this chicken down around the world. And this is feeding starving people It's important that he doesn't go out of business. And so this is not capitalism. This is crony capitalism, what they call crony capitalism. That's the difference. Or fascism or corporatism. And this is why we have rarely seen real capitalism actually operate. And this is what we have to guard against. And this is why communism doesn't really work. And people have tried to make it work over and over and over again. But what happens is people get unhappy, they get depressed when they work really hard and they don't see any kind of improvement in their lives from it. And they're innovative. And they come up with a great idea. And the leadership says, well, you're just a lowly worker. You don't come up with great ideas. Are you special? Do you think you're special? You're not special. And I tell you what, if we need your idea, then if I feel like I need your idea, then I'll accept your idea. And they send them off. Then what do? They take the idea, if it's a good idea, and they just said, well, I came up with it. And they take the credit themselves for the idea. Well, he's just a lowly worker. He works for me, so I'm the boss of the whole area, so I'm going to take the credit for it. And so this is demoralizing. And people realize they just want to keep their heads down, don't make waves, don't stand out, because you may become a target of a jealous leader, or a leader that thinks you may be trying to take his job, because he likes his job, because he's got a better car, he's got a better apartment, maybe has access to a nice looking mistress, or more money, or whatever it is that he wants. He has a little bit more of it, and he's not about to give that up for anything. And he's thinking, well, who is this guy? This guy's trying to steal my thunder. He's trying to take my role here. And they get jealous, and they get worried, I've got to, I can't let the guys above me see that this guy is really smart and got some answers and could make things better. And I didn't come up with it, and so that makes me look bad. So I'm not going to let anybody know about this lowly peasant worker's great idea. See how that works? And that's demoralizing, because word gets out. And people start thinking, I don't even care. I don't even care. I just want my money, and I'm going to go home and drink vodka, or whatever it is they're drinking. And that's what you see. You see people just self-medicating in these societies and just saying, screw it, I'm just going to have a good time. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to have my girlfriend, my wife, my family, my home, my dasha in the country, or whatever it is that I have, and just not do it. So they're not interested in innovating because they don't get anything from it. It doesn't work out for it. So you have a lack of innovation. China has a terrible problem with this. Even though China has actually adopted a lot of capitalistic ideas and the way they do business. And the leadership has understood that the people need to be able to get rewards like they would in a capitalist system for innovation. So they're saying, okay, we'll let them do this. We'll let you do this. We'll let you have some freedom, start your own business, innovate, do something new, do something different. Maybe start a little competition going, but just leave us in power, and we're the communists, and we're going to keep a lid on it. And we get to control it ultimately. If you get really too big and we think you're a threat, then we get to squash you if we want. And so at the same time, I mean, I've actually talked to Chinese people. I've heard interviews with Chinese people. And one of their biggest fears is that the schools are not providing enough stimulation and interest for the students, and they're not coming up with the ideas. They're getting great grades, but they're not coming up with new ideas. So I've run out of time. That's all there is for this week. Have a great weekend and sleep well.